Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Well, I've seen online on YouTube some people talking about how it could be the right time to buy long-term gilts. So we're going to look at that today, and we're going to see whether it is the right time to buy gilts, despite the fact that even Ray Dalio, the founder of one of the biggest hedge funds in the world, Bridgewater Associates, is warning, a bit like I've been warning for years, of a death spiral in the UK and also in the US for that matter. So that's what we'll look at today. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about inflation and the fact that you can't really trust the UK government nor the Bank of England when it comes to inflation or the way they calculate inflation and what they actually define as inflation. And I've got proof for that. And that's very important, because if you don't really know what the rate of inflation or the rate of the debasement of the currency is, you're going to be fooled into buying gilts or UK government bonds or US treasuries. And I think the same thing is happening in the US, but today we'll focus on the UK. The first thing I would say is that we've been talking here on the channel, and hopefully a lot of you know by now, that the CPI is not inflation. The CPI is a measure of prices. It's the Consumer Price Index. It's a consequence of inflation. And inflation is always a monetary and government phenomenon. Why government and monetary? Well, government because it's only governments that can give the Bank of England or a central bank the monopoly power to issue currency out of thin air. And it's only government that can force the central bank to buy its debt with money created out of thin air. It's not real money. It's not commodity money that's earned through effort, right? It doesn't have any value. The only reason it has some value, even though it's depreciating at a rate of knots right now, is that they can force you at the barrel of a gun or putting you in prison, right, to pay taxes with that fiat monopoly currency. So back in July, it was July of, 2022. I made a video warning people that the Office of National Statistics, which is a government institution in the UK, had changed the way they calculate CPI, and that it started from May 22nd. So it switched over on May 22nd. And of course, the Bank of England as well, I'd been following, and I have quite a few videos in where I use the Bank of England's inflation calculator, and the Bank of England, of course, uses the government's data, the CPI data. So if the ONS changed the way CPI is calculated, and they did it in May 2022, all the way back to the beginning of the post-war era, it changes history. And it's interesting because I did that video, and it was called in July of 2022, and I'm going to put it up here in the cards. It was called ONS Flagrantly Fudges Inflation Data, Bank of England Off the Hook for Overshooting CPI Target. And I'm going to come to the numbers in a minute. You don't have to watch the whole video, the old video, but I recommend you do. You will see my proof on that video. And then there's another video which is more recent, and I didn't do it. It's an interview that former Prime Minister Liz Truss did with a guy called Peter McCormack. It's a YouTube channel, The Peter McCormack Show. And it's entitled Liz Truss, The Deep State, Grooming Gangs, Economic Reform, and Free Speech. And in that interview, she notes that when she came into power in September of 2022, one of the things she wanted to do is reform the Bank of England, because the Bank of England had been made independent by Gordon Brown and Tony Blair in 1997, and it was unaccountable basically to Parliament. Prior to that, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, or the Secretary of the Treasury equivalent here in the UK, had the power to influence the Bank of England. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because the Bank of England wouldn't be around if it wasn't for Parliament. Of course, it was a long time ago that it was given a royal charter to exist back in 1694. But without Parliament, without really the people behind it, the Bank of England shouldn't really be around. So one of the things that I gave me like a eureka moment when I listened to her interview is that she said she wanted to reform the Bank of England. And I'm sure while she was campaigning to be the leader of the Conservatives and become Prime Minister, she was talking about that. And I think it's one of the reasons they changed the CPI. And you're going to see why right now, because I'm going to give you the data. So I did a video back on the 25th of June, 2021. Yes, and this is the video I used in the video from July 2022 to compare the CPI, or the inflation calculator at the Bank of England. So back then, I'd noted that inflation from 1914 to 2020 had averaged 4.6% a year. So how it works is that you go into the Bank of England inflation calculator and you type £1 in 1914, cost in 2020, and it gives you the result, £118, and it tells you inflation average 4.6%. So that's where it was back in 2021. But for some reason, I was checking the Bank of England inflation calculator about a year later, and I found that that number had changed, and it had changed fairly significantly. Maybe not for people who don't really look at things like this, but for me, it did. So in the video from July 2022, where I exposed this change in CPI, this change in history, really, if you do the same exercise, £1 in 1914, cost in 2020, well, it came up to £78.53 instead of 118. And you have to admit that is a huge change. And the inflation average dropped from 4.6 to 4.2, which doesn't sound a lot. It's only 0.4. But for a period of 108 years, that difference of 0.4 makes a huge difference. As you can see, it's telling us that the pound was a lot stronger now than it was a year before, because you only needed 78.53 pounds in 2022 to buy something that was £1 in 1914, while a year earlier it was 118. So they completely changed the history of inflation, or the CPI, in this country. And why do I think they did that? Well, so what is the best way to protect your savings from this death spiral from the inflation of the currency, from the debasement of the currency? Well, I've been telling people for over 20 years that gold and silver are the place to be. And if you haven't started yet putting some of your savings into gold and silver, you should think about it, in my opinion. I've got some affiliates here in the UK, Gold Investments. You can find all the details below in the description. It's a family-run business. You can call them and talk to them, ask for advice, and make sure you tell them that I referred you to them. In the United States, of course, I'm affiliated with Miles Franklin and my friend Andy Scheckman. Again, a family-run business for over 30 years, and you can call them and talk to them and ask for advice. All the details are, of course, below in the description. Because of the Bank of England independence and Liz Truss. And that was my eureka moment. I think it was a couple of weeks ago when I listened to that Liz Truss interview, and she said she wanted to reform the Bank of England. And it would have been a lot easier if you could prove that the Bank of England had not kept its target of 2% CPI, right? And I think that's why they changed the CPI, the ONS, the government and the Bank of England. They were all involved. We're told that the ONS is independent, that the government and the Bank of England are like separate. But I'm sure they did something there, because in the same video that I did in 2021, the 25th of June 2021, I spoke about the Bank of England that from the period of 1997 to 2020, in 1997 was when it gained independence, and it had to keep a 2% CPI target. I noted in that video that inflation had averaged 2.7%. Did the same exercise. A pound in 1997, cost in 2020, £1.86. And then in my video on the 20th of July, when I exposed this change, I looked at that as well. And the pound in 1997, cost in 2020, £1.55, not £1.86. So guess where that average dropped to? Well, conveniently dropped to 1.9%, which is just below the Bank of England's target of 2%. So, and that's why I think they did it. That's why they changed the CPI, to make the Bank of England look more competent, because you had Liz Truss coming in. Liz Truss was going to put a spotlight on the Bank of England, and then, of course, they got rid of her through the manipulation of the markets, in my opinion. Some people think it was the budget, but if you look at the gilt yields, they started going up way before she came into power. And a lot of people don't, well, I haven't seen anyone talk about the fact that the High Court of England, the highest court of the land, decided against big corporate pension funds to, in their case against the government, because the government changed the way they calculate the coupon for UK linkers, which are inflation-protected bonds. Instead of using RPI, which is always a higher number than CPI, they're going to start using CPI from 2030. So in my book, that was like a default. And that's when the gilt market started dropping and yields started spiking, and a lot of defined benefit pension programs started getting hammered. So why am I going through this inflation CPI fudge? Well, because when you're buying government bonds, and this is what this video is about, should you really be buying gilts or treasuries. Yeah, when you buy government bonds, you want to know what the rate of currency debasement or inflation or is really. And what investors use nowadays is not money supply, but they use the CPI or other measures, PCE. And if you can't really trust those measures, how can you tell whether the compensation you're receiving from the government for lending to them is really good compensation? And I would venture to say that it isn't. And I've looked at the numbers on this as well, and I've used gold because gold is money. It's the ultimate store of value. It's the most stable store of value. It has for over thousands of years maintained its purchasing power. And I've looked from 1968, where we get data from the LBMA for the pound, and this is what's happened with the price of gold. In 1968, the price of gold was £14.61, and as of yesterday, the price of gold was at 2,224.78. So in these 56 years or so, the average gain per annum in the price of gold has been 9.4%. And if you look at the Bank of England inflation calculator, according to them, since 1968 till 2023, Bank of England inflation calculator says that CPI averaged 5% per annum. So you've gotten more than enough protection from gold, from this debasement of the currency. And I would argue that this 5% is probably a lot higher. Maybe it's more like 6 or 7. They fudged things back in 2022, so you can't really trust the numbers. Gilts, well, back to gilts. And Ray Dalio came out yesterday, of course, said Bridgewater founder Ray Dalio warns of UK death spiral, sell-off in gilts since budget suggests market balking at higher borrowing needs, says billionaire investor. Well, and of course, many of you know that I've been warning about the UK debt time bomb. I've got a playlist for it. I've been warning of this for years, only because it's maths, right? And because I've known that the political class, not just here in the UK, but in the US, they're all Keynesians, and they're going to keep spending and inflating, and especially here, they're going to keep the size of government bigger. There's very little political will to do the right thing, because we've gotten to a point that to do the right thing, you have to implode the whole system. And I've also warned, of course, of UK economic collapse 2021 and beyond. So it looks like the mainstream and one of the world's biggest hedge funds are joining me. So what is Ray Dalio saying? Well, he's basically saying the same thing. Both countries are doing big time deficit spending. The US even more than the UK. The US is deficit spending more than 6% of GDP, which is unheard of in a time where you supposedly don't have a recession. So this number is probably even bigger. The UK is still at 4.5%. And Ray Dalio says that to get things under control, they need to reduce it to 3% of GDP, not even go back to a balanced budget. Well, that's something impossible, I would say now. So that's what he's saying. And he's saying what I've been saying, that they're between a rock and a hard place. because if they try to rein in the government spending and deficit spending and the size of government, they're also going to hurt growth because they've been depending on government for growth to keep that GDP number embellished. And they've done this. I mean, here in the UK, it's even worse. And we don't have, of course, the major reserve currency. So, yes, I've been covering gilts. I've been warning about the rising yields. I've been saying that the bull market in gilts that we had since the early 80s until 2020 or thereabouts is over. And we've had, in the last 10 days or so, a rebound in the price of gilts. And so yields have dropped. So it looks now that it's safe to get in, at least according to some people out there on YouTube. But I would say that the place to be still is in gold and silver, especially gold, and especially coins of the realm like this. This is a 1 ounce St. George slaying the dragon coin. There's also Britannias, and there's also sovereigns, right? And why coins of the realm? Why are they important? Well, because they incur no capital gains tax because they are legal tender, coins of the realm. As I said, they've been averaging, it's been averaging 9.4% since 1968 per annum. Yes, it might not be 9.4% every year. It might be less or more, but on average is 9.4. And the reason to have gold is not to make money because it's money. It's to preserve and sometimes even increase the purchasing power of your savings. Since 2000, the beginning of this century, it's actually been a bit more. It's been about 10% per annum, and it does make a difference. 9.4 to 10 over a long period of time makes a huge difference. So yes, you can buy long-term gilts. They're around 4.5–5%. And if you believe that they're going to rein in inflation, you should be buying it. The other reason you should be buying it is if you want to finance the government and what they're doing. And of course, you already finance the government without even lending money to them. And how do you do that? Well, through your taxes. So if you're okay with financing two-tier policing, if you're okay with financing illegal migrants to come in here into the country and have free accommodation, free healthcare ahead of everyone else, if you're okay with financing wars abroad, if you're okay with financing this crazy climate change narrative, not only in the UK but abroad, if you're okay with all that, then you should be buying gilts because by buying gilts, you're helping finance the government. That's what it's all about. So gold gives you an optionality to vote with your wallet. It tells the government, I'm not happy with what you're doing. I'm not going to lend you money. And I'm sorry, your credit card limit is up to here. And that's why it's possible as well that the UK government could go bust. It could go bust. It has happened before. Back in 1976, the IMF had to come in and the UK had to borrow $4 billion from the IMF. And I think it's possible that that could happen again. And why is that? Well, because they're not getting things under control. We just had a number today, and it's propitious because I prepared this topic already yesterday, and then this came out this morning. UK borrows more than expected in December. Government borrowing hits 17.8 billion as Chancellor Rachel Reeves faces pressure to turn around the economy. So It was expected to be an amount of 14.1 billion. That's what the market expected. And I also saw that in December of 2023, the deficit had been 10.1 billion. So it's almost doubled the spending or the deficit. So it's not getting better. And as Ray Dalio said, they're between a rock and a hard place. If they cut back government, they cut back spending, they're going to slow down the economy because they've made the economy so dependent on the public sector, which makes no sense, of course, because it doesn't create wealth, that if you cut spending and borrowing and deficit spending, you're going to slow down the economy, you're going to have less tax receipts, and you're going to actually the growth is not, the public sector growth will not spill over into the private sector. So, yeah, so brace yourselves and keep an eye on the gilt yields. But anyway, I'm going to do that for you, and I'm going to keep updating you. Right now, things seem to have calmed down. And is it surprising that actually the price of gold in pounds has made a new high this morning? No, it's not surprising. So we're above 2,230. And I think ultimately, as we look here at a 20-pound Bank of England note, the problem with this system is that it's a system that is, well, fraudulent. That's the only thing I can say, because it says here that this note, on this note, it says, I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of 20 pounds. And I've called the Bank of England to ask them what that means. And they said, well, it means that you can bring an old note here or to another bank and they'll give you a new one. And I said, so why don't you put that there? You can always replace your old notes. And they couldn't answer that. And the reason they keep this is because prior to fiat currency, prior to the World War I, where you could actually go to the bank, and what this meant is that they'd give you 20 of these, 20 sovereigns, which is legally a pound. But now they just create these out of thin air, not backed by anything. And therein lies the whole problem, and that's why we are where we are. So I'm going to stop here. We won't look at the markets today. We know that gold is doing well in pounds. It's also doing well in dollars. It's back up above 27.50. 27.90 is the key level here. That's the all-time high from last year. It looks like we could break that very soon, but you never know with gold and silver. But over the long term, I'm still bullish, more bearish than anything. I'm bearish these things, and that's why gold and silver are looking better and better. So with that, I'm going to wish you all a very good day. Take care. Bye.